welcome to the Clinton School and another in our series of community conversations, public programs, and distinguished lecturers. We're glad to have you here tonight. My name is Skip Rutherford, and I'm Dean of the school, and we welcome you, this wonderfully large crowd tonight, to hear a great woman and a great speaker, and we'll all enjoy getting our book signed when this is completed. To introduce her as a Maryland native, we do have Maryland representatives at the Clinton School. Malcolm Glover is a graduate of our inaugural class. He is a very talented young person. He was a finalist for a Rhodes Scholarship, a graduate of Florida A&M University, and at the Clinton School was involved in a wide variety of activities, but one of the things that he really did and that is worth seeing is a documentary he produced on his work in the Sudan. It is a fantastic documentary, and if you ask him, he'll probably be glad to show it to you. But it really is well done, and it really brings the issues that he worked with as a Clinton School student right to the forefront. And we're very proud of that, and we're very proud of the work he's done. So to introduce our speaker, would you please welcome Malcolm Glover.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Malcolm Glover, and I would like to welcome all of you to the University of Arkansas Clinton School of Public Service. Our distinguished speaker for this evening is Mrs. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend was the first woman to serve as Lieutenant Governor for the great state of Maryland before mounting her own bid to become governor in 2002. As the eldest child of Robert and Ethel Kennedy, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend has made a name for herself as a victims' rights advocate and an innovator in the fight against crime. While serving as Lieutenant Governor from 1995 until 2003, Mrs. Townsend was in charge of overseeing the work of some of Maryland's major departments, including the Departments of State Police, the Departments of Economic Development and Transportation, as well as the Office of Children, Youth, and Families. She is known nationally for her innovative and results-oriented programs that bolster academic excellence and require citizen service. Mrs. Townsend is also well known for developing and strengthening Maryland's biotech business sector and establishing one of the first statewide offices of character education. Before being elected Lieutenant Governor, Townsend served in the Clinton administration for 2 years as the Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and prior to serving at the Department of Justice, Mrs. Townsend spent 7 years as the founder and the director of the Maryland Student Service Alliance. It was in this role that she led the fight to make Maryland the first state in the nation to require all high school students to perform community service. And if I might make a point of personal privilege, as a product of Maryland's public schools, one of the major reasons why I'm a public servant and I'm dedicated to community service and volunteering is because of Mrs. Townsend's passion for service and her commitment to getting all students involved in working in their communities. I'm also proud to say that when I became of age to vote in 2002, Mrs. Townsend was the first person that I voted for. The first vote that I cast was for her when she ran for governor. I've always been a great fan of her, so I'm a little bit nervous, but since leaving office, Mrs. Townsend has served on the board of directors for many organizations, worked with various academic institutions, and she is a consultant to several corporations. As a Marylander and as a public servant, it's with great pride that I present to all of you Mrs. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. The honor
He's a great Marylander, and I hope he comes back and runs for office in Maryland. That would be terrific. I am so happy to be here tonight. I love I was able to take a wonderful tour of the Clinton Library, and I have to say, it made me so pleased and proud of Bill Clinton and all he accomplished. And so just amazed at what that one man was able to do in that 8 years. Peace, prosperity, and making us proud all around the world. You know, I was very sorry that I wasn't able to come when the groundbreaking was occurring here, but I had been asked to give a speech months and months before in Guatemala, as I was in Antigua, Guatemala. But as I walked the streets of Guatemala, in little shop after little shop, there were pictures of Bill Clinton. And I was able to, I wrote him and I said, I'm so sorry that I missed the groundbreaking, but you're remembered in Antigua. And he wrote me back. He is such an amazing person, president, world leader. And I do think we need another Clinton pretty soon. It's also great, I have to tell you, to be back in Arkansas. I was in Arkansas a while ago. I have to tell you the story about myself. I don't often tell the story, but it seemed appropriate, at least I mentioned it earlier. When I was in college, I had a crush on my teacher. And he thought that was inappropriate, because he thought that a teacher should have nothing to do with the students. And I kept saying, don't you think we should meet more often? Why? And I also had the problem that he had a girlfriend. So I was trying to think what I could do to get him away from class and away from his girlfriend. And at that time, we were studying American literature, and we had read Mark Twain. So I thought, well, there's only one solution. We'll have to build a raft and float down the Mississippi River. So we did. We built a raft in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and we floated 500 miles down the Mississippi, and we stopped in Arkansas. You had a great state on the Mississippi. And we just celebrated our 33rd wedding anniversary. Such a nice story. Anyway, so I saw Mississippi. I saw Arkansas from the banks of Mississippi. But it's great to be here in Little Rock, and you've got a fabulous library, a wonderful town, and I would love to talk to you a little bit tonight about the book I wrote, Failing America is Faithful. And I wrote this book because I believe that faith is important. It was that I grew up with a great faith in a Catholic family, but we were taught that faith asked us to work for social justice and to work for the common good. And I realized that that's what I had thought was true all throughout American history, that faith was a progressive force from the 1740s, for instance, when we had the First Great Awakening, and the preachers would tell the people, God lay within you, and therefore you don't have to pay attention to the ministers in Boston, or to the government officials, or to the crown. It gave people the spirit to rebel in 1776, that First Great Awakening. And in the Second Great Awakening, the ministers were teaching people that God lay not only within each of you, but within the slaves. And that led to the abolitionist movement, and then to the suffragette movement. And then in the late 19th century, we had the social gospel, where the book was written, what would Jesus do? And the answer at that time was Jesus wouldn't let children work 15 hours a day. And Jesus wouldn't let people work in unsafe conditions. And Jesus wouldn't be pleased with the treatment of prisoners and would care about orphanages. And there was a whole sense that if you really cared about the Gospels, you would open your heart to people who were in trouble. And then in the 30s and 40s, it was people of religious faith who led the union movement and fact, in January, before my book came out, as I was talking to John Sweeney, the president of the AFL-CIO, and I have to tell you, I would talk to anybody who came within 5 feet of me about my book. That's what happens when you're writing a book. Oh my God, I wouldn't do it. And I was saying to John, did you know that in the 30s and 40s and 50s, the Jesuits had 300 labor organizing schools teaching people how to organize? And he looked at me and said, Kathleen, where have you been? He said, Kathleen, not only do I know that, I went to one of those Jesuit schools. And then he went on and he told me that his teacher was in fact the priest who was portrayed on the waterfront. So, and you all remember the Civil Rights Movement, which was led by Reverend Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy, the anti-war movement against the Vietnam War, where we had Sister Corita and Reverend Sloan Coffin and the Berrigan brothers. So I had seen in my study of history what religion could do for people. It could open us up to different realities. And yet, when I wrote this book, I was looking at what so many religious leaders were doing today. We still have troubles today. We still have a war that is unjust and not going well. Do they talk about that? I haven't heard it. There was a study just out about 2 weeks ago that said for the first time in 33 years, the percentage of poor people in this country is growing. Where are the religious leaders on that? We have issues on health care in our country. More and more people are losing their health care. Where are the religious leaders on that? Where are the religious leaders on global warming? You know what they're talking about? Abortion, stem cell research, and same-sex marriage. That's what they're talking about. I believe that they're missing a much larger challenge, and that's what I wanted to say. Now, I know that there are some people who think that religion should get out of politics, and I have to say I'm sometimes sympathetic with that, because when I ran for Congress in Maryland 20 years ago, I ran for Congress, and at that time my parish priest condemned me from the pulpit. My speeches at Catholic schools on pro-choice were canceled because I was considered inappropriate to speak. When I was asked by the nuns, I love the nuns, to speak at my old high school, I had gone to a Catholic girls' school, I was picketed, called baby killer, murderer, and asked how dare I call myself a Catholic. And I have to tell you, when this first happened, I was really upset. I felt as though a member of my own family was condemning me, because I had grown up in a Catholic family, I had gone to Catholic schools for 10 years, and I was devastated. I actually went to the bishop in Baltimore with tears in my eyes. I was so upset. But over the last 20 years, I've come to understand that what's really going on with the Catholic hierarchy is they're just afraid of women. I realized that, and I realized that, you know, they're slow. Some people have a problem changing. It did take them 350 years to figure out that Galileo was right. So I see my role is as teaching them, and I find that it's an important role. And you are here to help me teach them tonight. And I say that because, unlike some Catholics who decided to leave the church, and many of my friends have, and many Catholic women have, I don't want to. It's a powerful church, it's a big church, and I think that I have a role to make sure that they get their theology right. And also, very frankly, you know, I love the church that I grew up in. I grew up in a, church in which which I'll just tell you a little bit about my childhood, about how religion was so important to me when I was growing up. Not only, you know, like most believers, did my parents take us to church every Sunday. My mother, in trying to imitate my grandmother, thought that we should go to church every day. So, you know, when other kids were getting to sleep in the summer till, you know, 10, 11, 12 o'clock, 7 o'clock, we were up every day of the week going to St. Francis. And at night, we had, you know, nightly prayers. We said our nightly prayers, we prayed the rosary, and then my mother would read us 60 saints for boys or 60 saints for girls, and my father would often read to us the Bible. And when I told my grandmother Rose that my father read the Bible to us, she said, he did? Catholics don't read the Bible. And in fact, they don't. My mother, when she was in elementary school, was in fact prohibited from reading the Bible. It was, I know, it's a different tradition. We get that. Anyway, so but for us it was important. And faith was a very much part of our lives. I mean, if you walked into our house, there were, at every door there was holy water. We blessed ourselves before we went into any room. Anytime we had to do something that was tough, my mother would say, offer this up for the souls in purgatory. We were always praying to St. Anthony to help us find things. You guys are great. No, I have to tell you. And St. Anthony was so successful that my mother and father named my brother David, our fourth child in our family, after St. Anthony. And St. Anthony is still being helpful. In fact, I was shopping with my mother in Washington, D.C. about 2 months ago, and St. Anthony found us a parking space on Connecticut Avenue, right next to Neiman Marcus. Really important. So all of this was very much part of our life. But there was a serious part too, which is that if you take on tough issues, there are consequences. So that, as some of you know, my father was, when I was very young, was the chief counsel to the Senate Racket Committee hearings and was investigating the corruption in some of the unions, and which was not by, this is not about church, but it is a funny story about my childhood. You know, when other kids, parents of 3- and 4-year-olds took their kids to the playground, you know, swing on the swings, play in the sandbox, my mother took me to the Senate Racket Committee hearings. Some of my first words were, I refuse to answer that on the grounds. Kid you not. But anyway, those Teamsters did not like what my father was doing, and so for a period of time, they threatened to throw acid in my eyes. And so when other kids were leaving elementary school, I was always sent up to the principal's office to wait till my mother actually arrived. And I wasn't allowed for a period of time to walk in our neighborhood because it was considered so dangerous. So I tell you that because it was really a belief that sometimes if you are fighting for the good, there are tough consequences. It wasn't always funny, it wasn't always easy. There was a toughness involved. But I think my father also had a very special sense of faith. He was considered, of all my aunts and uncles, the most religious of all of them. But he had a great view of God, I believe. He believed, for instance, I'll tell you 3 stories that I thought helped to illustrate this. The first is when he went to college, he joined the Newman Center, which was the Catholic part of the college. He went to Harvard, and he went there because he was a believer. But at that point, there was a priest who would say that only Catholics could be saved. And my father didn't believe that. He said that couldn't be true. How could you have a God that created the earth, created all these people all over the world, and say that one group would be saved that happened to live at a particular point in time? That wouldn't be a good God. That wouldn't be a just God. That couldn't be true. So he left the Newman Center. And my grandmother, Rose, was, as you can upset because she had grown up in a time in which you followed your priest. But my father said that couldn't be the case. And in fact, the good news is he did leave, and the priest, Father Feeney, was eventually excommunicated. And I think what I really learned from my family, and I'll just tell you the story of my father, was a faith that was open and hopeful. When my uncle died, for instance, when my uncle, the president, died, it was a very, very tough time for the country, I'm sure you remember, and for my family. And my father, you know, was devastated. Everything that he had worked for seemed to have, you know, disappeared. He was wondering what his relationship would be to Lyndon Johnson. Not too good. And he was trying to arrange for all these people to come from all over the world to go to the funeral. And yet, on the day of the funeral, while he was at the White House, he snuck away and he wrote me a letter. And I want to share that letter with you because I think it's stunning. He said, "Dear Kathleen, as the oldest of the Kennedy grandchildren, I think you understood what happened, that Jack died and was buried today. You have a special responsibility to John, my cousin, and to Joe, my brother. Be kind to others and work for your country. Love, Dad." Because you can think of how somebody in that position could have been bitter or angry or revengeful or not taking that time. And yet what he was talking about was responsibility and kindness and love of country. Something large and big. And that's the kind of faith that I think he had and really what was important for this country. In 1966, he went to South Africa, and he was speaking to some of the students there about the horrors of apartheid. And while he was speaking, there were students in the college, in the universities, who were saying, "No, you know, this is fine. This has worked over, you know, for years. Why are you condemning it?" And he did this. He said, "Listen, think of this. You die. You go to heaven, you enter the pearly gates, and suppose when you do that, suppose God is black." And that woke them up. And then he came back to the United States and wrote an article for Look magazine saying, "Suppose God is black." And I think about that kind of God that my father saw. This was a big God. This is a God who cared about justice. This was a God that said, how do we create a just society in which we care about all its members? It was not just about your personal relationship and whether you're saved, all of which might be important. It was really asking a larger question. And I think that's what I believe we need to do today, is to reclaim that faith and ask much larger questions of faith, not narrow ones. We have allowed God to be shrunk for abortion and same-sex marriage and stem cell research. These are small issues. These aren't the largest questions we can ask from our faith. Now, some people I know have said, well, Kathleen, you don't speak to people who are non-believers. And I have to address that because some, you know, I remember I've talked to Daniel Dennett, and I know you have Richard Hawkins here, and I've talked to Daniel Dennett, and he said, "Listen, Kathleen, atheists have better marriages, give more to the poor, and are happier than believers." So there. I said, okay, well, for us sinners, we need God. So, you know, I'm not saying to those who aren't believers, I'm just saying for believers, we have a certain responsibility. And others have said, well, my book criticizes churches for not caring about the poor. And in fact, that's not really what I'm saying, because I think churches of any denomination do a very good job of opening up soup kitchens, or helping the homeless, or running schools, that they do make a special effort. What I'm really talking about is not charity, but justice. You know, there's this wonderful Hebrew word called tzedakah, which basically is the same word in Hebrew for justice and for charity. In English we have two words, but in Hebrew there's only one. And I think that what we need to do is understand that charity is not enough. We also need justice. There's a guy called David Beckham who runs Bread for the World, and when he goes into churches, he says you can put money in the collection box for the church, but you should put a letter in the collection box to your congressman to make sure that they're doing the right thing. As he's pointed out, Moses didn't have a bake sale. You deal with big issues, not in small ways, but in big ways. Now the question is, what is happening today? When I started to write this book, and this is always a question when you start to write, I really was upset with the churches. I really did believe they'd done a terrible, terrible disservice to the people in the pews and also to our country. But I think that things are changing and things are coming around a little bit. A couple of years ago, I went to see Rick Warren, who, as many of you know, has written this book, The Purpose-Driven Life. And I went to see him in Saddleback, California. And I read The Purpose-Driven Life, and I have to admit, you know, we have this notion in the Catholic faith about avoiding the occasions of sin. Well, reading this book was really, it was an occasion of sin because it filled me with lust that he had sold 25 million copies. But what was interesting about his book, if any of you read it, it's a terrific book about having a personal relationship to God. But there is no mention of the poor, the sick, the community, about what we should do for the least among us. None of that is mentioned in the book. So, of course, when I went to see him, I pointed that out. And to his credit, he had figured that out before I went to see him. And he said, you know, Kathleen, I have to repent. I never saw the 2,100 passages in the Bible that asked us to care about the poor. Which I thought was an amazing admission, because most people who become successful don't usually acknowledge that they've made mistakes or that they missed something. But he did. And he explained that, and this is, I think, really interesting for all of us to understand. He explained that at the beginning of the 19th century, the Protestant churches split between the mainline Protestant churches that became interested in social justice and the evangelical churches that became most interested in a personal relationship to God. And therefore, they really did, although they read the same Bible, they read it really differently. And it taught me to actually ask myself, what don't I see that is right in front of my face because I come with it from a different point of view? The good news is that Rick Warren is a terrific preacher. He's trained 250,000 ministers, and he has taught them and is teaching them that it is not enough just for your personal salvation. You also have to think of community. That God wants us to deal with the biggest issues because God is a great God and a big God. And so I end this talk tonight with hope in my heart for the people of faith and for the people of this country, that we are going to care for our community, for the common good, and for the least among us. Thank you very much.
understand that Pope Benedict XVI has just published recently the first volume of his 2-volume biography of Jesus. And I haven't read his book either. But a reviewer points out that he makes the argument that seems to agree with yours, that at the heart of faith is the personal relationship to God through Jesus, the Christ. And he, not only that, but he goes on to argue that therefore authority over order, over politics and social concerns should be left to secular authorities. The reviewer that I read said this seems to agree with Martin Luther, but I noticed that the Pope is very upset. Well, first of all, when he was the enforcer of orthodoxy, he seemed to silence clerics who took that position. And now he seems to be distressed by the liberation theology in South America. And I just wonder how that jives.
What's going on with this Pope? Is that what you're wondering? Yeah. It's a great question. What is going on with the Pope? Well, let me start with saying he really did write. He's a very learned man. I'm going to say a few good things about the Pope. First, to start off with. He wrote a wonderful encyclical. His first encyclical was about love, which was really quite fabulous. It was beautifully written, and it talked about how we do have to serve our fellow human being. And what was interesting, unlike all other Catholic encyclicals, it did not just quote Catholic authors. It quoted all authors throughout history. So it showed that we can learn from people who aren't just of our faith, and I think that was an important message. I think one of the problems with being a pope, and this is true with being a politician too, you're surrounded by yes people. And if you're in the Vatican, you're really surrounded by yes people. And you don't hear other points of view. And this is a particular issue with this. And so he, for instance, made that terrible mistake when he was in Germany last year and didn't understand how his remarks would inflame the people of the Islam faith. He went to South America and didn't understand that when he was talking about how wonderful it was that the Indians became Catholic, that many of them were tortured into becoming Catholic, and how wrong that was. He just didn't think about it, and nobody around him was willing to speak out. Which is why, as you heard me say earlier, that's what my position, that's my role in life. And really part of that is a serious role, in that I once went to a conference with about 40 prominent Catholics, and the cardinal there said, the Pope only hears from conservative Catholics because liberal Catholics don't think he's going to listen to them. So once again, it's reinforced, he only hears from a narrow group. And my hope is that after my book tour is ended, we will start a strong letter writing campaign from more progressive Catholics. So we start to hear from other people. And that's my job. Now, what I like about, and he's just going to be narrow, and that's why I think it's important that we stand up and speak out about what's happening. And I have to tell you, so many Catholics have written me, priests and nuns, including a cardinal, thanking me for my book. And I actually, one of my favorite stories, of course, is that when I was in Chicago, a priest giving a talk at the University of Chicago Theological Center, a priest brought 15 students from his confirmation class, drove them 2 hours from Racine, Wisconsin, and said, I want them to know what the Catholic Church should really be about. We like that. And so, in other words, we have to speak out. And I think too often progressive Catholics have been silent. Yes.
I heard you interviewed a few weeks ago on Radio Net by
Is that right? Can we just explain? Do you think my brother is, my brother Bobby interviewed me on his radio show?
I wanted people to buy your book.
It's so sweet.
But you just made one statement early on tonight about the Catholic hierarchy being afraid of women. And,
yes.
And I certainly don't think that that's restricted to the Catholic hierarchy.
Yeah.
The hierarchy on the board of the college in my hometown, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit more about that in terms of what we can do at the grassroots level as we try to chip away at
Yes.
that fear that they have?
Yes, absolutely. No, they really are. I mean, they're afraid of women. And you can see it in the Catholic theology, which actually, just to remind the Protestants, you were Catholic for about 1,500 years. So, this is part of your legacy as well. We were called, literally, misbegotten males and the devil's gateway because of Eve. I mean, all of man's downfall was, for many years, it was part of the theology, the teaching of the church, that it was women's fault and Eve's fault, and if it hadn't been for her, we would still be saved. So it's been a long tradition, and in the early church, women had speaking roles, and they could talk, and they could preach, and they could be deacons, ordained, and obviously that has been closed down. I think there are ways to, and I think a lot of priests at the local level feel embarrassed about this, and so we have to encourage them, and they're ashamed, which means that we take leadership roles in the church, which is actually happening in a number of churches, which is one of the advantages of people not becoming priests. I don't know how many of this audience is Catholic. 3. I just did this. I don't want to have we could talk forever about the Catholic Church, but we won't. But anyway, part of it is to take leadership roles. 2 is to say, if you really care about the poor, which is what sometimes they talk about, many of the poor are in fact women, and they need to be leaders in their community, and it's hard to show leadership if they aren't allowed speaking roles in the church. So that's what we have to do, and we have to keep saying it over and over again. The church changes all the time. I mean, they've changed on all sorts of issues, but they're not going to change if they think they can get away with the old ways, and so they have to be continually reminded. And that's our job, to educate and to remind. And the reason I say it's important is they have Catholic Church has 1 billion members. Christian churches have, another, billion members. We're powerful, and there's a lot of good that churches can do. So it's not a smart idea just to throw them out. You want them to be progressive, and that idea that we should build a common community, and that we should care about our other neighbors, and that God is within each of us is an important doctrine. So I don't want to give up on the churches, and as one of your speakers would have us do.
First of all, it may surprise you, but as an ordained Southern Baptist minister, I must say, God bless you. I share your plight. I'm trying to do amongst Baptists and evangelicals what you're trying to do in the Catholic Church. So my question is, my dilemma is, as a Baptist particularly, I'm strongly for separation of church and state.
That's your tradition.
That's my tradition.
Absolutely.
I can't abandon that, but yet I'm interested in faith and politics. So how do you do that? How do you make your faith relevant in the political realm in a partisan way or in any way?
That is a terrific question. Part of the answer really is to speak, first of all, remember, there's a separation of state, of religion and government, which is not faith and politics. That's an important distinction. You don't want the government telling you where to go to church worship. And in fact, it doesn't work. I mean, that's why I think Europe has lost much of its faith, because people got disgusted with it. I think it's been what happened with Terry Schiavo. People say this is not the role of government, and they get upset with government pretending that they're holy. Government isn't holy. It has challenges, and we need to work with those challenges, but it is not faith-based. I have to tell you, that's actually what happened with Solidarity. Solidarity was very strong when you had the communists in charge, because it was the underground against it. But as soon as Solidarity left and the Pope tried to control the Polish government, people said, no, that's not the right thing to do. So it undermines faith the more that government gets involved. But we certainly have a moral voice, the prophetic voice, that I think is critically important. And I believe that, I talk about this in the book, that what the Protestants have given us is very, very important, I think. A sense, number one, that the divinity, God is the equality of all of us before God. It's a beautiful doctrine. The idea of protest, which is also important. That, everybody in power makes mistakes, and you have to have a voice to just tell them that. And third, the idea of perfectionism, that God has put us on this glorious earth. It's called good, but we can always make it better. We are, after all, there's this great debate among two rabbis about what is the most important part of the Bible. And one rabbi says, well, the most important message in the Bible is to love our neighbor as ourselves. And the other rabbi says, no. The most important part of the Bible is that we are all made in the image and likeness of God. He says, how can that be the case? You don't believe that we are actually God's image. We are animals. So yes, we are animals, and we always have the choice. Are we going to live by the law of the strongest tooth and the biggest claw? Or are we going to live a life of justice? And I believe that what Protestant teaches us is that we can live a life of justice. We can live in God's image. And that's a fabulous legacy for Southern Baptists. And I'm glad you're in there fighting for it. Yes.
My question, you're talking about particularly poverty and also justice. And I wonder, it was not, the immigration question is the big question I have, and what we're doing and the possibility of some solution. I wonder if you'd comment on that.
That is a great question. I think that, as we all know, the Bible asks us to welcome the stranger. And I think that there has been really ugly words used about immigrants that have been very, very unfortunate. Why do we have 12 million immigrants in the United States? Because I believe it's because we need them. I mean, if you believe in capitalism, obviously they're here. They're working, they're getting jobs. And I think that we could do a much better job in our country being fair about welcoming people that we actually need, giving them a role in our community, and working with countries around the world, particularly Mexico and Central America, where people are coming from, to help them build their own strong economies. And I don't think we've done a good part of that at all. I mean, if you go to Central America, do you know where the money comes from in Central America? It comes from all the workers here. What kind of weird economy is that? And I think we should do a much better job of helping people in their own countries and the nation. But as you can imagine, I come from a family of immigrants. My great-grandfather was the mayor, was a congressman. His name was Honey Fitz. And his first act, or is the only act that he's remembered for, when he was in Congress. He was there for 6 years. But what he's really proud of was that he said, he proposed legislation that you would not have, you could vote without speaking English, because he wanted to make sure that the Italians would also vote. So, Tancredo, think of that. I think it's just very unbelievable. But it's a tough issue because you have to make sure that there's fairness when you welcome people. But I don't think we have not, I mean, the fact that we didn't have 12 million illegal immigrants 20 years ago. Something's going on, and we just got to do a better job. And I think that the Bush and Senator Kennedy, did I say that? Are trying to work something out. I mean, I think it's just, I do think this idea of building a wall is kind of nutty, because people are going to come in all sorts of ways. And also, who would build a wall? Not the illegal immigrants. It's just so ironic. Yes?
You mentioned at the very beginning the fact that God is in each one of us.
Yeah.
And we also say that we have a government for the people, by the people. And I'm just wondering, in the same way that Jesus told someone, you have to be born again to be saved, he also told a man, you have to sell everything you own in order to be saved.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, how do you see the individual's role in this, not just in making sure that we have the right leaders in our churches and the right leaders in our government, but as each individual to see justice come to our communities?
Well, I think the best way to work on justice is to find a group of friends that you can work with and a group of community. I really do think that Jesus was onto something when he got a group of 12 people to work with. It's easier to fight for justice if you're not fighting alone. It's easier to be courageous when you're not fighting alone. I think you want to know that somebody's at your back, and you want to know that somebody is helping you. So that's why I believe in organized religion. I mean, the number of people when I was writing this book said, well, what about spirituality? I said, well, that's fine, but you're by yourself. And I think it's much easier to do good things when you don't feel you're alone. And I'll tell you why. I've worked in a lot of human rights. I've been a big supporter of human rights around the globe. And I've noticed that the people who are able to stand up against their government are usually those who are part of some community. They're not sitting by themselves. They are with somebody. They know that somebody's protecting them. So that's why I think church is important, or if you are not, you really feel alienated by church, find a group of friends.
We have some questions up in the balconies.
Yes. Look at this balcony. I mean, you guys, it's really terrific.
To what extent do you feel that churches have been, sort of taken advantage of by rather cynical, large, politically oriented organizations? I was hearing yesterday about an organization called the Discovery Institute, very well heeled, and with the goal of bringing faith issues into politics in order to use the church.
Well, I think the churches have definitely been taken over in some places. I have to tell you, Weldon Gaddy, who was Southern Baptist, describes how Richard Viguerie and other operatives of the Republican Party absolutely decided to take over the Southern Baptists on purpose on the issue of literally of the inerrancy of the Bible, and figured that that would help to divide people and organizing them politically. So I think that has been very dangerous. I said that a couple of times, and I have to tell you, a priest thought I was being very narrow-minded, because that you can't just blame politics for what is going on in the churches. You also have to think about what else is going on in churches. So I believe that the Republican Party has been very smart about using churches as they've said, where is the one place, the community, that is lots of people are gathered 3 days before the election? Hello, churches. So that's why I talked about friendship. If you want to do a good job, if you want to make a big impact, you really got to build a sense of community. Churches are a great way to do it, and that's why I wrote this book about churches rather than just about politicians. I have to tell you, 25 years ago, I wrote a number of articles criticizing Democratic politicians for losing their faith. By what I mean, that they would condemn Jerry Falwell, for instance, for the moral majority and say, oh, we're the immoral minority. I thought, that was a stupid thing to be. Why would you want that? Why not take that great progressive tradition and claim it for ourselves? But I thought now it had gone so far that the churches really had to be reawakened, and that's what needs to happen, rather than just, because you want it to change the values of the country, not just the politics, not just particular law, but a sense of what our churches should be teaching us. So it's a big fight. It's a huge fight, but it is a good fight.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kathleen, I think you need to float the Mississippi River again. We are honored that Kathleen Kennedy Townsend was here. That was a wonderful response. But ladies and gentlemen, let's give her another round of applause as you can see, we have a capacity crowd tonight, so let me just do a little logistics for you. Kathleen is going to the book signing table. For those of you that have a book or want to buy a book, get it signed, please head in that direction. For those of you that would like to visit, enjoy the refreshments of the reception, please head to my right. And in a few minutes, once we start moving, we'll move the stage out, so those of you that want to leave can get out this way. One of these days, we'll get an auditorium, but in the meantime, thank you all for coming and supporting the lecture.